Hey y'all, this is Ron K. Armstrong, filmmaker extraordinaire. And today I have an interesting topic I want to talk to you about. It's called Hollywood Lies and Deceptions. And it's kind of a big topic and it relates to society at large and how we live our mundane day-to-day life. But I want to try and make this as concise as possible and show how it relates to you as an artist, whether you're a filmmaker or an actor. Now, everyone wants to break into the industry. They want to make their mark. They want to be famous. They want to make a living at doing this. However, what I try to talk about and try to teach mostly is not to have a selfish, self-centered attitude about it, is to take a broader look at the industry, break in, go in there, try to make it a better place. Because in my perspective, Hollywood is a global propaganda machine. It's putting out information that's really conditioning and directing culture, directing the thought process of people globally. And it's not for the betterment of humankind, it's for the detriment. So what I want to talk about is what's going on, how you as an artist can get in there and kind of change things. In order to do that, you first have to have an understanding of the current problem. Now, when I look at individuals who are into the spiritual community or so-called conscious community, who they understand that there's an issue, there's a problem with the way the world is today, and they want to make a change. However, most of the solutions that they propose can't work simply because they're trying to come up with a solution to a problem using the same method and modes that create a problem in the first place, you know? So they're not able to come out of that paradigm of thinking to radically come up with a solve for what's going on. And let me explain this as best I can. The problem with the world today is we can say, well, it's racism, it's sexism, it's this, it's that, but those are just byproducts. We have to get to the source of the problem, which again, I've always said is left brain thinking. The Western world has polarized us into this way of thinking, this pattern of thinking that is, that elevates science above all other things. And you know that science is nothing but sensory data. If you can't see, hear, feel, and touch it, it doesn't exist. It doesn't. Science cannot conceive of the metaphysical. It doesn't understand that, or I should say, science is a product of left brain thinking. And if you understand anything about how the left brain functions, is that it seeks to separate things, label and define things, and it creates factions. So it's splitting hairs, you know. So the left brain cannot get to the origin of truth or understand what truth is. Now, how does this relate to Hollywood and what's going on? I had a friend who contacted me and said he was doing some research on Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and said, did you know Gandhi was actually a racist? You know, he was putting out material and propaganda through his newspaper to get whites to and Indians to oppose black Africans, you know, and essentially trying to start a race war. And I said, well, this is how the dominant global elite operate, that they create these factions. And the way they do it is through the nomenclatures, through ideology, is to say, you know what, you're a Democrat, you're a Republican, you're a feminist, you know, you're a liberal. And what this does is it does not get you to understand that we are all one, we are consciousness essentially, and that it sets this stage for this grand conflict. And the more that they come up with these labels and definitions, the more that we take sides, and it creates these cells, these different factions that fight against one another. And the next thing they do is they basically allocate resources to some factions while depriving others, and that creates more conflict, you know, because everybody wants to coexist on this planet, but then they come up with this idea that, oh, there's not enough resources for this planet, so we may have to depopulate the planet. Now, that's instrumental in understanding how Hollywood as a propaganda machine works, because Hollywood is not a self-contained entity. It works and it has branches that connect to the major universities, different institutions, Wall Street. But more importantly, let me give you the layout as to how this operates. So basically, you have your major think tank institutions, organizations like Tavistock, the Council on Foreign Relations. You know, I encourage you to research these think tanks, especially Tavistock, because what they do is they are very adept and they do a lot of studies. They've been around for a long time into social engineering, in directing the country and the planet in a certain direction culturally to control the thinking, or we should say the real estate of your mind, so that you're preoccupied with certain thoughts, to control your thinking and direct it in a certain way. Absolutely, then you become a puppet. So, and they have done this successfully, you know. So the idea is here is that when we subscribe to these ideas and definitions, this ideology, then we start to create conflict on the planet. And this is exactly what they love, because in order to control the planet and the direction of the planet, they can't do so with a unified populations of billions of people who have a consensus of thought. And there's a number of reasons why they can't control that, because when you have a consensus of thought, you manipulate reality and you change the current space-time continuum. But on a more important level, when you're creating these factions, you create within these factions watchdogs that keep the faction, to keep that particular cell, I should say, in order. And also it creates this hierarchical scale to where, you know, one faction is higher than the other, and they're vying for positions of power. Meanwhile, the puppet masters are looking and they're laughing. So these think tank organizations are instrumental, not only in social engineering, but they create these studies, and they kind of like say, oh, these studies are legitimate, and they disseminate these studies to the major universities. These universities pick up on the studies and they teach the students, and then Hollywood picks up on that, and then Hollywood creates their movies, their TV shows, you know, the mass media, in conjunction to the universities who are sanctioning these things. And we see this in current movies, where you see things like, you know, The Mummy, you know, you see things like Exodus, Gods and Kings, where you have this falsifying of history. And I want you to understand something. When you have individuals like Gandhi who are put on this pedestal, that we say, oh, he was for peace, he was a good man. He was a good man. He was a hardcore racist, and that he was trying to do what the global elite want the watchdogs to do, is that they want them vying for power, to not want a change or to create a revolution, but to assimilate into a system of fighting, a system to where it's keeping people segregated apart. When you can do that, then you have successfully created these minions who will do, who will be your subjects, who will institute an order of control on your behalf, so you don't have to directly control the population, but you have these anointed and appointed individuals who will exercise that control for you. So what, you know, the thing is that you have these, and it's very insidious when you look at the thinking behind it. You have these groups that are very melanated in skin content. What I mean by that, melanin creates the pigmentation in your skin, who don't like other melanated people. So you have Gandhi, who Indian people are dark skinned, opposing black people who are dark skinned, black Africans, and saying how bad they are, when you yourself are a descendant of African people. That makes no sense. And we see the same thing with the Latino population, who there's a certain segment of Hispanics who don't want anything to do with the idea that their heritage comes from Africa. So what they do is they turn inward, attack those within their own group, their own racial group, who are of darker skin hue. Even though there may be Hispanics or Puerto Ricans or Dominican, if you're darker skin hue, they attack them. When they have the novellas, they have the TV shows, they only hire the lighter skin, European looking ones in those TV shows or commercials within the Spanish population. And then they attack black people as a way to climb up the racial totem pole, to vie for more power. So this is, and one of the major institutions behind this is, again, Hollywood is putting out the propaganda endorsed by the universities, endorsed by the think tank organizations like the Heritage Foundation, going back to the Council on Foreign Relations, to Tavistock, who are mind manipulators. And what they do is they work at social engineering, social mind control, so that when you see Hollywood films, they have a construct behind them. They have a formula behind them. And that formula is to program you to think in a certain way. So I want to go over some of the ideas that they put forth so you can understand what I'm talking about. And the solution to this is you as filmmakers and actors, that when you get into the industry, is not to want to assimilate and become one of them, but to understand what you're facing and say, this has to change. You know, I'm not going to be in Mahatma Gandhi where I'm going in there and going to try and create racial strife or turn one group who may be a shade darker than the other against the other. So one of the things that you'll see is in Hollywood, in the way they disseminate their propaganda globally, is that they have a repetition of the storylines. You'll see that there's the same storyline where it's polarized. Left brain thinking is always polarization thinking. Right brain thinking is always integrated, meaning it's looking to seek how things are similar and not how things are separated. It's just congregative thinking. So what you see in Hollywood is that you always have the bad guy, the good guy, storyline, bad guy, good guy. One defeats the other, the good guy defeats the bad guy. And somehow or another, it always works out in favor of the good guy, just because Hollywood is proposing in their storylines that just because you have the right are on your side, that you will come out victorious. Well, let me explain something to you. The planet is dominated by the elite 1%. We have lost the battle for freedom, physical freedom and mental freedom. Only thing we may have left is our spiritual freedom. Because just because you're right doesn't mean you'll come out on top. And I'm sorry to say that and burst your bubble. And a lot of the religions, Islam, Christianity, teach that. You have God on your side, you'll be victorious. God is on your side, but you have to fight. You can't just say, because I'm righteous, I'll win at the end of the day. And this is the storyline that Hollywood puts out. It's like, well, the good guy always wins, and the bad guy can't shoot. He'll shoot the good guy and miss with every bullet, but the good guy shoots one bullet and hits the bad guy because he's right. And that's how it ends every time. The good guy always wins. No, that's incorrect. The other thing that Hollywood puts out is this hierarchy. And what I mean by hierarchy is you'll find that it's very keen on creating what I call side pieces, meaning that you have these great minority actors like your Forrest Whitakers, Idris Elbas, who always seem to take a back seat to the white male characters who always get more of the camera time, the spotlight, and who are heroic, who are traveling the world, who are beating up the bad guys, doing all these stunts and acrobats. And this hierarchy exists to where also you have, another case in point, is you have white women are always elevated as the epitome of beauty. You can't have Asian women, you can't have black women compete with them on any level. And in fact, the norm now for Hollywood is that you have your overweight black woman who is kind of sassy and says these one-liners and is kind of like, very witty and has street smarts, and it's ridiculous. And you see a lot of this. I call this the hierarchy. The other thing is Hollywood is shying away from the idea of a higher self or a higher consciousness. You'll never see in Hollywood films where the hero depends on God or his higher consciousness to intuit wisdom and knowledge to overcome the villain, to overcome a situation. So we've got to be cognizant of that and say, you know what, why don't we ever see this? This is a form of censorship, because Hollywood fears that there's moving into religion, and then there's a whole complicated thing there that they don't want to touch. But you can do it in such a way that is very creative in your storytelling devices. You can explore higher consciousness. You can explore getting wisdom and not always being book learned. And let me tell you something. Hollywood and Western society in general, it rewards being clever, being slick. It doesn't reward true wisdom. All right, let me go on. And then you'll find this also in a lot of Hollywood films is supporting of war and colonialism. It's always going to paint America in a very bright and glorious light to endorse or instill patriotism within the audience, even though that we know that, you know, and if this is news to you, I'm sorry, that the United States is instrumental in breaking up third world countries and bankrupting them, purposely bankrupting them so they cannot be self-sufficient, lending them money, putting them in debt for decades so that they can never develop an infrastructure that is self-supportive, and the people live in poverty. And I mean, when I mean poverty, I don't mean here where we have a welfare system that can support you. I mean these people have nothing. They live in mud huts. So Hollywood does not dare broach that subject to where we look at this country in a way that we are the ones doing the most evil, subversive, dastardly things to other countries, you know. There's a book out, I think it's called The Economic Hitman, which explains how this process works, how we go into third world countries, how we disrupt the economy, you know, and how we basically take out the democratically elected leader by putting out propaganda that, oh, he's really bad, he's really evil, and then appointing a puppet leader in there that does the bidding of this country, the United States. Okay, the other thing is, I kind of touched on this before, is the reliance in these films on Cartesian logic. It's like, you know, to solve a problem, that you have a direct approach to solving the problem. It's this one-to-one correlation. There's never an indirect route to solving the problem. And what I mean by the indirect route, I've talked about this before, is using wisdom, relying on a higher power, higher consciousness, your higher self to get a solution to the problem. There's always, if there is an issue where the protagonist has to overcome, he's going to get a bunch of guns or a tank and then roll in there like Bruce Willis and be victorious at the end of the day. And there's other ways and story telling ways that we can do this, where it's not always that one-to-one relationship, because life doesn't always work that way. I'm sorry. The last thing and the most important thing is the blatant distortion of facts. Hollywood is just distorting information. It's lying about the history of the planet, you know, and we see this time and time again. Every time they make a film, it's always the film has to elevate, you know, white culture above native culture. Native people are always looking primitive, you know. We know for a fact that when you look at Mayan culture, Egyptian culture, African culture, you know, satellite telescopes have told us that in Ethiopia we can see that they were empires, that these people were master architects, that we know that the history of the planet began with melanated people. And what I mean by that melanated, again, we're talking about the pigmentation, because we know that in order to survive the hot sun, where that life began in those tropical environments, is that you had that pigmentation, and that was a way to ensuring that humankind survived by having that pigmentation. And there was the one great continent, we can call it Pangaea or whatever, and then from there we had the migration outward, and because the migration outward and those humans who settled into different regions on the planet lost their pigmentation through the climate evolution, all right, or climate adaptation. So this distortion of facts is supporting the racial conflict, is supporting the distortion of history, you know. And the History Channel, things like that, they're in cahoots with the universities, with the major think tank organizations or institutions to blatantly put out propaganda and to dissuade the population from understanding the truth. Going back to what I was saying, that it's important, Hollywood wants the conflict to continue. This is why every now and then they will not award minority films or actors. They won't give them awards, and then when there's a big brouhaha about it, then they will give out the awards, because they want to keep that tension building. They want to keep that fighting going. And this is the solve for this is really easy, but you have to understand that most of the conflicts that you see on the planet, most of the wars that you see on the planet are orchestrated, which is why you'll never see Hollywood put out films that really look behind 9/11, to do an unbiased investigation or telling of alternative viewpoint of what happened then, or even what's going on with other wars. Who was really behind World War I and World War II? Let's be real. That was those wars were orchestrated by big financiers, and again, going back to the ruling elite who control the planet, the 1%. So I wanted to make this video to help artists out there to get a broader picture of what we need to do in breaking into the industry. Start looking at different ways to tell your stories. I see too many filmmakers and too many actors who are self-centered. They want to tell their story. They're like, well, I can only tell a story from my perspective, which is living in the hood. So I'm gonna create a gangbang story or a hood story, and it's so played out. There's so many of those, and they what they're doing is perpetually they're keeping it going. The blatant stereotypes, the misinformation, the conflict, they're keeping that going, and Hollywood welcomes that. Hollywood welcomes that, Hollywood welcomes the idea that you have these radical feminists who are going into Hollywood and creating films that are anti-male, because they want that strife, they want that conflict, they want to keep that going, because Hollywood is a reflection of society at large. And society, most people in the population are products of social engineering, in that their minds are controlled by the dominant elite, because we don't have independent thought. We're not thinking independently, because if we were, we'd be consciously aware of the fact that we're polarizing left brain thinking, and that there's something very wrong with what's going on in the world today, where you have the regurgitation of information as, oh, he's smart just because he can remember something, but he really doesn't have wisdom or knowledge. He really doesn't know the information. You know what I mean? Or we keep seeing the same repetitive stories being pumped out by Hollywood, but we don't question why are we seeing those stories over and over again. Or when our heroes and our sheroes, or however you want to call it, we elevate these people like Gandhi, but we don't realize that these people were not spiritually elevated, is what we were told. You know what I mean? That there was a big lie put forth in order to further the agenda. So with that said, I hope you like this broadcast. If you enjoyed it, like the video, subscribe to my channel so I can make more for you. So this is filmmaker Ron K. Armstrong, and that's all for now.